and welcome to our roundtable. My name is Amy O'Leary, and I'm the Executive Director at Strategies for Children. And Strategies for Children is a proud steering committee member of the Common Start Coalition. We are so excited to have everybody here with us tonight. And first, I'm going to provide an overview on the Common Start legislation, and then we have a fantastic discussion lined up. And then we'll talk more about next steps toward the end. So I'm going to share my screen. Of course, now I can't find the slides. There they are. So the Common Start legislation would establish a system of affordable, high-quality early education and childcare for all Massachusetts families over a 5-year timeline. And you see that there are two bills. There is a House bill and a Senate bill, and we are working both tracks to get this passed by the end of this legislative session. And this is a visual so that you really is so helpful to think about how we think about the vision of Common Start. And you can see all of the different impact areas. You think about parents, around business, around outcomes for young children, around early educators, directors, family child care providers. And you can see how the vision is very comprehensive for what we are hoping to achieve around affordability, around high quality programs, and around support for early educators. As I am talking, it would be great also if you would put in chat who you are and where you are zooming in from, so we can get to know who's in the room. So when we think about the bill, we are thinking about children birth through 5, as well as out of school and wraparound services, children with special needs through age 15. The bill works to expand access for children with disabilities or households that don't speak English. And also thinking about the affordability piece for free services for family below 50% of state median income. And you can see what that is breaking down. We also think about our rich mixed delivery system. So we're talking about child care centers, family child care providers, public schools. So we know that parents choose where they send their young children, and we want to make sure that that choice continues. The bill calls for a direct to provider bedrock funding, and this is based on how many children the capacity a provider has, and it is really designed to help offset the operating costs. What we know is most funding from early education and care is right now connected. Every dollar is connected either to a family's income or a work status. This bedrock funding would provide additional dollars for programs that we would expect would be part of the higher educator pay. And we also know that the bedrock funding would think about how we work in our existing system around thinking about child care subsidies and parent fees. Also, when we think about early educators, there would be a professional development grant that folks would opt in. And we're talking about things like scholarships, like loan forgiveness, and other types of financial aid. And really thinking about the skills and credentials that we know are so critical, thinking about all the way from a post-secondary certificate program and then degree programs. We have watched early educators go back to school. We have watched higher ed respond. So the bill really speaks to making sure that we are continuing that level of support. We also know that in the bill, it's really looking at a partnership with the Department of Early Education and Care. And that's where we see some of this policy work, including developing a salary and benefits guideline, and to thinking about this equitable compensation that we know is so desperately needed. We know that we'll have opportunities for public comment. We want to think about compensation structures, and then thinking about benefits. And we know how critical that is as well, that when we're talking about salaries and compensation, that there are many different parts of what make up kind of the full package for educators. And when we think about the process for the timeline, the bill, along with every other bill filed in Massachusetts, was filed in January of 2021. And in Massachusetts, we have 2 years for legislation to move through the process and become a law. And you can see the bill was introduced. We have a really strong legislative support through co-sponsors of the bill. And then we had the public hearing. So all of the bills filed at the State House that have anything to do with early education and early literacy and full day kindergarten had a public hearing on November 23rd, 2021. And like almost everything Common Start does, there was a great representation of different perspectives and expertise offering testimony to the committee. We also know that there were many folks that offered written testimony that went to legislators, during this time. So right now, our bill has been extended because we know there are other levers happening at the State House right now. So there's an Early Education Economic Review Commission that the recommendations so far have been really nicely aligned with all the goals of the Common Start legislation. So we are working, the deadline to pass this bill is July 2022. So we're in March, so the next few months are going to be filled with opportunities to advocate as the bill continues on through the process. So we know, we'll talk more about the end, how you can stay connected and how you can stay updated on opportunities for advocacy. But at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Jill Ashton. So Jill, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to everyone from the Common Start Coalition, and thank you to my co-panelists this evening. We're going to each introduce ourselves and share a little bit of information, and then we'll have an opportunity for some discussion. My name is Jill Ashton, and I serve as the Regional Administrator in New England at the Department of Labor for the Women's Bureau. And so the information that I'll be sharing this evening are federal level statistics. It is a pleasure to be able to continue to do this work with the Women's Bureau. Prior to joining the Women's Bureau in December, I was working at the state level with the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. So at the federal level, the Biden-Harris administration is leading an economic recovery in order to build back an economy that is fair, inclusive, and resilient. We must seize this opportunity to address deep and long-standing inequities that continue to hold back women, people of color, and working families. Access to affordable childcare is absolutely crucial for our successful economic recovery efforts. There is a correlation in the lack of solid care infrastructure and how it impacts women's labor force participation. And the childcare sector predominantly consists of women, and more specifically, women of color. We are currently experiencing the lowest female labor force participation in 33 years. That is significant. Even 23 months after the pandemic began, there are still over 1 million fewer women in the labor force. The impact of those job losses is not the same for all women. While the economy has been improving and unemployment has gone down, women have recovered more slowly than men, and Black women's employment has recovered the least. And nearly all losses in women's employment are mothers with children under the age of 13. I have 2 children, and folks who are on the call this evening, if you want to drop into the chat, your children's ages and some of the challenges that you have been facing, I would welcome that. Many of those who have left the labor force did so in order to provide care for their children. And even prior to the pandemic, many families faced difficulties securing and affording childcare. So this issue has only been amplified. People can't work if they don't have the security that their families are being cared for. But for generations, we have underinvested in the care economy. We've relied on unpaid and underpaid work of women, particularly women of color, to care for our children and elderly in order to keep our economy going. Women working in childcare are the backbone of our economy, and yet in January, the childcare service industry still had losses of more than 130,000 workers. That's over 12% of their workforce. 5.2 million women lived in households where children under the age of 5 were unable to attend daycare or another childcare arrangement in the past 4 weeks. And what's really challenging is this duality, right? The women's labor force participation is closely tied to availability of childcare, while at the same time, 95% of all childcare workers in the US are women. And childcare and early education workers receive the lowest wages of any occupation while doing one of the most important jobs in our economy, caring for our children. There are some solutions, and now is the time to see them through. Now is the time to fund a care system, including childcare, elder care, and home care that works for everyone who needs care while raising wages for women who provide this essential work. We need to balance upskilling with upwaging. We need to see increased coordination across all parts of the system, classroom education, and on-the-job training and placement. We all want to live in a world where we have time to care for our family. We have a home we love, a community where we thrive, and a career where we are valued. We know how to achieve this. We must pay women fairly, have career opportunities that are based on interest, not gender, have equitable access to affordable child and elder care, and make sure every job is a good job where people have a family-sustaining wage, sick time, paid leave, the opportunity to union organize and bargain collectively in a workplace free from harassment and discrimination. We have our work cut out for us, but together we are stronger. Progress is built upon collaboration, and we thank you so much for joining us here today to be part of this important forum. I will drop my contact information into the chat. I am very excited about engaging in conversation with my fellow or sister panelists, and look forward to hearing some of your questions as well. I now have the pleasure to turn the mic over to Commissioner Meredith Tuitt, representing the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women.
Thank you, Jill. I want to say thank you to all of you that are attending tonight. Women in the Workplace, Gender Equity and Child Care Roundtable Discussion with Common Start Coalition. So I want to say my sister in the mission of improving the lives of women and girls, Jill, had brought a lot of stats to the table that I'm excited she did, because we're able to share information. Tonight, I'm going to share some slides with you in a few minutes, but I want to tell you who I am. My name is Meredith Tuitt. I sit on the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. I was appointed by the Women's Legislative Caucus, and I am vice chair of our Legislative and Policy Committee, and I also serve in other different realms across the nation. I serve as president of the National Association Commissions for Women. And childcare and early education wraparound is something that we are all focusing on. Here in Massachusetts, the Common Start Coalition has been doing some phenomenal work. As you know, the bill was filed. We're now moving through the State House, and we have a lot of legislators that are supporting us. Advocacy is what we need, right? So that's why we're doing these roundtable conversations. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about advocacy and some of the information that the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women was able to collect. Back in 2020, we did a report on economic and social impact on women around childcare and education here. We released it back in October 2020. You can find it on our Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women website, and hope you go ahead and download it and review. Because one of the things that I want to say to you, sisters and brothers that are on the call with us tonight, childcare and education of our young people should be the number one thing we should be focusing on right now. After the epidemic, after the pandemic in 2020, we've now realized that our kids, our children need us to pay attention. We need to pay attention, because we, if we don't pay attention, our education system is not gonna improve. So let me jump some stats on here. I'm gonna share my screen with everyone so we can be able to, so you could see what we're talking about. So here we are. When we did our report, we did 90% of our respondents reported that the arrangements and had affected some way due to the COVID pandemic and changed their childcare and their educational arrangements. 61% of the respondents reported that childcare and educational arrangements had been so severely impacted that many of them, as we're going to talk about, had to give up their jobs because they had to stay home. They had no one to stay home with them. A lot of the parents that responded, the mothers that responded, said that they took chances of leaving their children at home while they went to work and worried about the impact of what was going to happen if they got reported, and they had reached to a breaking point. 88.9% of the respondents expressed that there was concern around social and emotional development of their children during the COVID and even after COVID, because numbers had risen for young people that were suffering from depression and isolation, and a lot of the young people that we talked to also during our Girls Initiative report, and that one also you can get off our website, the young sisters that we spoke to said that they felt like they were being isolated, their education was being stunted, they didn't feel they were going to be able to achieve an educational success because of the educational system and how it had been stunted because of the pandemic, right? So some of the findings that we came out with was that we had to, and the solutions was we had to increase funding for care providers to meet the needs of the community. Common Start, we're talking about our care providers in the Common Start, right? We're saying that our home care providers need our support, need our government support as much as we need them, right? Another thing that we brought out was investing in support and development of care and education provided to the workforce, right? So if we're not working with our mothers to allow them to have some type of care system for their young people that need daycare and provider care, or also working with them with the educational system, early ed and K to 12, right? So a lot of the parents, after school programs was something that they were struggling with because they had been cut before school programs. Because if your child's school starts at 8 o'clock and you have to be at work at 7 o'clock or 7:30, what does that child do before they have to be to school? It was before school programs, which have been cut back. A lot of the daycare slots, 15% or more of the slots had been cut, or the funding wasn't there for it altogether. So there were so many things that we had learned during the child care hearing and report, also during our girls listening sessions. So the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women, the reason why we are part of this coalition is because we saw that there was a need for wraparound care, not just daycare in home or in the early facility or early ed or preschool. It's got to be fully around forever for all of the young people. So I am excited to hear some of the questions that are coming up, and I'm going to now turn it over to my sister Anisha from Mass Now, and Anisha is going to come on and share some more information with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. And thank you all for joining. I'm so excited to get to be a part of this roundtable tonight. This is my first time representing Mass Now at an event, so I'm going to try not to speak 200 miles a second. I am the co-president of Mass Now, along with Natasha Hensey, who is unable to make it tonight. I am going to give you a bit of background about what Mass Now does in case you are unfamiliar, as a sort of explanation to why we are here, why we believe this is important, as everyone on this call does, I'm sure. Mass Now is the Massachusetts chapter of the National Organization for Women. We are a 3-part organization. We have a PAC that endorses feminist and queer candidates running for office across the Commonwealth at any level. We have a foundation, which is focused on education. We educate on feminist issues, which are, of course, all issues. And we look at those issues with the feminist lens, with an intersectional, intergenerational lens to understand how these issues affect us all, even if maybe we are not targeted by the items that we're specifically talking about. And we do that with community-driven programming, taking part in panels, showing up at events, fundraising, and all of that fun stuff. And lastly is the Ink, where all the really exciting fun things happen. That's where we get to lobby. And we are, of course, advocating for intersectional feminist issues and trying to get these great bills, just like this one, passed. And we are currently, we've got our largest legislative agenda. We are endorsing over 35 bills this legislative session, and that is everything from menstrual equity to decarceration, immigration, and of course, childcare, which is, as long as our organization has been around, so 53, 54 years, that has been a top issue for our members. And that's why we're here. Unlike my fellow panelists tonight, or my other panelists tonight, I will not be sharing a bunch of statistics up front, but I'm really excited to get to talk about how these issues affect all people. And personally, I'm really excited as a person who does not have children, who is not planning to have children, to talk about why this is a very important issue for me and why I want to do my part to help out. So I'm going to keep it brief. I'm going to keep it at that, and I will pass it along to Claire Tayluni, the Director of Government Affairs over at Reproductive Equity Now. Thank you all.
Thanks, Anisha. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Tayluni. I am, as Anisha said, the Director of Government Affairs for Reproductive Equity Now, which many of you may know was formerly NARAL Pro-Choice Massachusetts. I'm so excited to see so many people tuned in to join our conversation tonight. This is really great. At Reproductive Equity Now, our mission is to make equitable access to the full spectrum of reproductive healthcare a reality for every person. And I think at first glance, it might seem maybe out of scope to learn why we advocate with the Common Start Coalition for affordable access to childcare and early ed. But reproductive equity means using an intersectional lens to fight for access for repro healthcare and reproductive freedom. And that includes not just the ability to choose if and when and how to become a parent, which is of course why we advocate for equitable access to abortion care and the full spectrum of pregnancy care, but also the freedom to raise your children in a safe and healthy environment. And Massachusetts is undoubtedly a leader on reproductive freedom issues, especially with the passage of the Roe Act last year. But we really believe that repro freedom is not something that can be fully secured unless every person can make real decisions, which means having access to real options about whether and when to parent and to parent with dignity. We know that a pregnant person's ability to make their own decisions about reproductive healthcare is directly tied to their economic security. So if true equity as a Commonwealth, as we recover from this pandemic, is our goal, and as an organization, it's our goal, it's our mission, we have to acknowledge that reproductive equity and access to childcare are inherently linked as economic security issues. Studies show that in states that restrict access to abortion, and I know all eyes are on Texas right now, those states are more likely to have poor indicators of women's health, of children's health, and of social determinants of health. And you might think that Massachusetts doesn't really fit into that picture, but even here in the Commonwealth, we really, there are still systems of inequality and poverty that we need to dismantle. And we need to dismantle them in order to have a society that helps every person and every family thrive. At Reproductive Equity Now, we talk a lot about the difference between legality and accessibility. We advocate for laws and rights on the books, right? But we also acknowledge that there needs to be societal structures in place to make sure that those rights are reflecting the lived experience of every person. And if they don't, then we need to step in and improve that access. Last week, we heard President Biden in his State of the Union address say that parents are paying $14,000 a year for childcare. And first of all, I think in Massachusetts, we know it's much higher than that, but that's just simply not a reality for most parents. So the system exists, but it's not an actual choice that most parents can make. And it's a huge barrier to parenting with dignity. So I'm here, I'm really excited to be here because as a reproductive freedom organization, we know that establishing a pathway to universal and affordable childcare and early ed is a key way to make the system available to everybody and a key way to ensure that people and families have the true freedom to thrive. And we are, for those and many reasons, an enthusiastic member of the Common Start Coalition. It is my honor to kind of do a little moderating of our conversation this evening, in addition to participating. So I am excited to kind of kick us off with our first question. And I encourage my co-panelists to jump in, and I'll give us a nudge if we need to keep moving along. We're going to start with, how does childcare access and a poor care economy affect gender equity?
I'll jump
Meredith,
in.
you want to take this one first? Yeah, I'll follow you.
Okay, so childcare, as I quickly did in my intro, is such an important thing. Women typically would have a struggle because we are the providers of our young people more than the fathers sometimes, and then especially for the single mothers. We're working, we're trying to take care of our youth, we're trying to make sure they have good home care and homeschooling or going to regular schools. And if we can't provide them with the proper child care or the proper educational care facilities, then we have to worry about how many hours we can work. We have to worry about, can we work? We have to worry about if we have the ability to move up the ladder and take on more work responsibilities. Are we going to be able to still maintain our children and their care and their education? So a lot of times our women typically will step back and stay where they are so they can be able to make sure that their children are getting the proper care. So equity is important. I mean, childcare is important to the equity, because if we have the proper childcare, then we can move successfully, right? And I know Jill has some more good points to talk about that too. So I'm going to pass it on to Jill.
I just want to spotlight Amy O'Leary, who kicked us off this evening, dropped into the chat some information about the cost of care in Massachusetts, which is one of the highest in the nation. It is wild. I think the other thing that we really need to focus on is, again, that sort of the fact that working families, working mothers have this incredible challenge of high cost of care. And at the same time, the wages that are being paid to the folks that are providing care are often not sustaining in terms of living wage, which is, there's a disconnect there that needs to be addressed and has been ignored for too long. I think what I would like us to consider as we move forward is, what does that mean? That the fact that we've ignored it, the fact that we've undervalued that service for too long, mean in terms of educational equity and access later in life, as well as what does it mean for women's equity in the workforce and potential for advancement. My concern in this moment is that with women coming out of the workforce or reducing hours in the workforce or stepping back from responsibilities, what that means is we have fewer women that are in positions to make decisions about policy, be it policy at the State House or policy at an employer, because if there is, again, in this moment, a need to re-envision what the workforce will look like, what our economy is going to look like, then we need to have women and people of color at the table contributing to those conversations. Anisha, I'm really curious what your thoughts are here.
The last couple of points that you just made were really spot on as to how I think of this. When I think of the care economy, when I think of whose role it is to do care, right? Traditionally, that's women's job. That's people of, especially women of color. We know that. And women of color have been the ones that are expected to go out of the home to do this kind of care. And I think what we see, the secondary impact of that, of, okay, if there's no one, kids aren't going to school, who in the home can step up and take care of that? Is there someone that I can leave my kids with? And what do I do if I can't afford to pay them, right? If I'm not making a living wage enough to cover my childcare, who at home can do it? And then we see this added pressure, especially on younger girls and women, to step up, and they're the natural, right? They're, in our minds, the natural caretakers. So now we've got the second generation. We've got high schoolers, teenagers, college students who are helping out with their siblings at home, in addition to the pressures of school and education, in addition to the pressures of any of the other jobs or, events, experiences that they may have. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of gender equity is, are we expecting our sons to take on as much of this labor at home, this added labor, when there isn't an out-of-home childcare option? And if not, how much further are they advancing from those first few years of the work of being in a workforce without having to consider taking care of siblings or young children?
Excellent thoughts. Claire, what do you think?
I think if I can add from a reproductive freedom perspective, I think obviously in our organization and all eyes nationally are on the Supreme Court as it considers a case that's very likely to change half a century of federal precedent on abortion access. And all eyes are also on state legislatures across the country, which have passed a record high number of anti-abortion attacks in 2021, the highest number since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. And when we think about that, it's really important to note that those restrictions are about more than just access to healthcare. And I said this before, but a person's ability to make their own decisions about reproductive healthcare is directly tied to their economic security. A pregnant person who's forced to carry their pregnancy to term is more likely to experience poverty and unemployment. But so when you look at it from an economic standpoint, it's really important to note that access to basic healthcare really can't be the whole picture and what we focus on. And it's just one piece of the puzzle. So we can knock down every barrier to reproductive healthcare to make sure every person can control if and when they want to take on the costs of having a child. The dog has something to say in the background. But only to then force them to navigate an out of reach and expensive healthcare system is like they're back at square one. So I think to change gender equity, we really have to make sure each and every person, regardless of gender and regardless of race and socioeconomic status, for that matter, has access to that economic security and that social mobility. And we can't do that as a society if we're not thinking about how we support our caregiving economy.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. This is a question that was proposed by one of our panelists, and I'm really interested in the other panelists' thoughts on this. And I also encourage folks to have conversations in the chat, as well as pose questions to the panel in the chat, and we'll be monitoring it and try to pick those up for responses as well. So let's kick it off with, let's go back, we'll kind of go in reverse here. Claire, what are your thoughts on folks that are choosing not to be parents or don't intend to engage in parenting? How and why should they care about access to childcare?
I think it's a really important question, and I love that Anisha touched on this in the beginning as well. I think in a society that supports everyone, everyone needs to recognize that we're all in the same fight. Our fights aren't separate, they aren't siloed. Huckleberry really has some thoughts in the background. Sorry about that. But I think that, we talk about this a lot in organizations that are focused on reproductive access. We can't have reproductive justice without racial justice, without transit justice, without labor justice. Our fights are all linked together, and I'm not a parent myself, but I love people who are parents. I care deeply about them. I want them to succeed. I want them to feel supported in our society. I think we've all experienced in 2 years of a pandemic that we really can't get by in a society that's not, if we have an individualistic mindset and we're not thinking about our public health, our general welfare, collectively, we are all affected when a member of our society doesn't have childcare or is dealing paid with low wages. Our institutions really need to be redesigned to support everyone. And I'll just add, I feel the same way about abortion access. I don't think that it's not just people with abortions, people who get abortions who should care about abortion access. I want everyone to care about it because it impacts everybody. I want men to share their stories. I want parents to share their stories. And I want people who've never thought about it to think about how it impacts them and start talking to the people in their lives. We're all impacted in a society. And so I think everyone should care for everyone around them. Maybe Anisha has thoughts that she wants to add.
I would love to. This is it's a question that comes up for me a lot. As I have made the decision that I will not become a parent. And I also love a lot of people who are parents. I've the two, no offense to anyone, cutest nieces in the whole wide world. And I'm obsessed with them. And my best friend has 4 kids, which is astounding to me. And I think this is an issue that I've always cared about, right? I was a kid who was in after school programs and summer camp programs that were hosted by my town. And I'm sure my mom really had to work hard as essentially a single parent to provide some place for us to be that was keeping us out of trouble. Of course, some of us can still find trouble. But I think that I think about the way now that I'm seeing my peers parent, and I don't know how people are doing it, even in the most ideal of situations. If you are upper class, you've got a parent who's always at home, like all of those things, I still just can't imagine what the challenges come down to when you have to figure out, okay, between this time and this time, where are my children going to be? And what happens if I can't afford after school? Or what happens if I need to go to the doctor and I can't bring my kids in with me now because it's COVID? That was something when my sister-in-law was having her second child, going to all the doctor's appointments. She couldn't bring her baby in with her. So what happens? And fortunately, my mother's able to go and be present and help out. But what happens if you don't have that support system? I think that's really what it comes down to, is my ultimate concern for folks. How can I support people that don't have other systems of support? And of course, most people I can't. That's just not practical. But this is a way, right? We can get systems in place to help folks that maybe don't have a tight-knit community. And of course, this is an intersectional issue. At Mass Now, we are always thinking with an intersectional, intergenerational lens. And I think that one of the things to bring to the conversation is also something about generations and, the expectation of grandparents, and what are we demanding of folks that are in other generations, right? Maybe childcare is not something that you're going to be concerned with if you have already raised your children, but it is something that affects us all. Yeah, I feel like I rambled, but that's kind of it. How can, I love people that care for kids, and I want to make sure that is as easy for them, and that they don't have to. There's certain things I just don't think we should have to worry about, right? And making sure your children have a safe space to be in outside of school hours or inside of school hours is absolutely one of them.
like what both of you have just touched on is sort of the collective good, right? The investment in childcare and in the care economy provides for the collective good of our society, right? And I would love to share a story of, I was traveling for the first time when I had an infant, my first. And so of course, like new parent, first child, I was nervous, and I was unreasonably nervous and anxious. And a good girlfriend of mine said, like, oh, please, like everyone's either had a baby, been a baby, or at one point will benefit from your child growing up and contributing to the economy. Like they can all deal and you will be fine. And I really appreciated her like putting it in perspective for me. Now that I think, the child still like threw up on me on the plane and I freaked out and it was bad news. But I just, again, like the fact that like we are in a society with other people, and recognizing that at this time in our country, depending on your family composition, somewhere between 37 and 50% of families are providing care. And so, as Claire pointed out, I think Anisha built upon, like, I care if the person who's driving the commuter train has childcare. I want them to be able to be focused while they're at work and make sure that trip, from my home to my job is a safe trip, right? I want my doctor to make sure that they don't have to worry about, their childcare issues. Everyone, I think, benefits in our society when we are able to be confident and secure in care for our children and for our elders. Meredith, what are your thoughts or experiences with this?
I have a lot of friends who sister friends who don't have children, don't plan on having children, but they are what I call second mothers, second fathers to their nieces, their nephews, their godchildren, their friends' children. So I always try to make sure that they're supported through my network, because it takes a village to raise a child. I don't care if people don't believe in that anymore. It takes a village to raise a child. So if we can speak to those people that are not parents, who don't have children, and ask them, well, what about your niece and nephew? What about your best friend's kids? Don't you think they need support? Don't you think? Because I can tell a story back in the days when before I got into politics, I was working at NYNEX. Anybody on here remember NYNEX? It's now called Verizon, and I worked in NYNEX. I worked in billing and collections. And we had just moved back from the South. I'm veteran. My kids are military brats. We travel around. And I had just moved back and I was working. And my two were in a home care setting, right? And one of the kids came in with that rash you get from dogs, from puppies. So the whole place got quarantined and she couldn't take the kids. So here it is now. Single mother, 2 kids, and everybody in my family works during the day, and I had to go to work. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, so what I'm going to do. So my mom, who needed to be at work for 2:30, said, well, I can watch them until 1:30 because I got to get on the road to get to work, right? Figure out what you can do for the afternoon, and somebody can watch them. So everybody else, their work schedules, they didn't get off till 5:30, so on and so on. So I went to my second level manager and I said, can I flex my hours? Because I have someone to watch my kids until 1:30. I need 2 hours because I need to be able to go home and take care of my children. And they took me to the next level manager for the next level manager to say to me, I needed to learn how to delegate responsibility in my children. So delegation of responsibility in my children was a phone call to a girlfriend of mine to tell her to write me a resignation letter, email it to me. I printed it out. I walked into them and I gave them the letter saying, as of now, I no longer work with NYNEX, because you can't tell me if I already know. So that's why I think Common Start is such an important thing, because we still have mamas like that. We still have. So if we, who are no longer parents, because my kids are grown now, if we can't advocate for our friends and our family members, then we are lost. So we really need to look at it from that perspective. And Anisha, you have kids, baby, because if your best friend has 4 and you got the 2 cutest nieces in the world, you have 6 children. I don't know if you don't know it. All right.
Yeah, and I do also want to add on, I think part of the reason too that I think some people might be like, well, I don't have to be concerned with kids, yada, yada. I think one thing that would be, you'd find someone really hard pressed to argue against is how important this is for children, right? Like being a child who I know this is like absolutely unheard of now, but I started babysitting my little sister when I was like 8, 9 alone, at home with just the 2 of us hanging out after school. I got us snacks, I got our homework done. I did all of that. Which I'm a little bit of an A-type, so it worked out very well. But no kid should have to have the pressure of looking after another kid because there's not an option, right? That's what I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone to disagree with.
Moving on, I would love to hear from you. I'm sure Meredith and Anisha, you will have thoughts on this, and Jill as well. How will establishing a pathway to affordable childcare and early ed play a role, particularly in women's advancement?
It's so important. I guess this is where I now talk about, I age myself. So my daughter works with the feds, just gave birth to her 2nd child. She's 2 months. So, and she has a 4-year-old. She applied for a new position, which would be a promotion, more work. Her husband works engineering, and he leaves early at 4:30 to get to work. And right now she's still working from home because she's a Fed, right? Her biggest worry right now is when she has to start going back to the office, which I think they say it's at the end of April. April, May or something, they're going to be going back into the office. She can't find a daycare provider for the 2-month-old. So now we're trying to figure out how is this going to work, because she's in line for promotion. She's struggling to find a daycare provider that she could afford, or one that has a slot, right? The one that she had with the 4-year-old when the pandemic hit, she said to my daughter, during the shutdown, you have to keep paying me to hold your slot. So when my daughter decided not to continue paying her because she was going to be working from home for so long, now that she's trying to go back to the lady's like, oh, well, you left me, you didn't. So she's struggling, to find a new provider. Now, all of this ties into equity, because if she doesn't find a good provider for the baby, because the 4-year-old's in early ed, right? The promotion that's waiting for her when she goes back from maternity, is she going to have to turn it down? What is she going to have to do? So those are things that we have to think about, because child care and educational care facilities, after school, before school, whatever, helps even in a two couple family. So it's not just the single parents, it's the married couples that are struggling. So it goes across the board. And I really, really, really hope that everybody on here, if you're not a supporter of Common Start, please go and look at the website, get involved, know what it's about, because you're impacted also. Sorry.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. And I think the thing that I would like to leave this evening conversation with, or would like to stress for this evening, is valuing women and valuing their work, right? And their contribution to society. We've done this before. The United States government during World War II provided childcare. And the reason that they did that was because women needed to move into the labor force in larger numbers than ever before, in order to support the war effort. And then it just stopped. And what we've seen since that time is a suppression in wages and an expanse in the wealth gap. And so we have to have both parents, or we have to have, either both parents in the workforce or people working multiple jobs in order to be able to sustain themselves and their families. And that's no longer okay. It's no longer okay to undervalue women's contribution and to exclude them again from access of contributing as full members of society. And so we've done it before, we can do it again. I'm positive and hopeful about folks' recognition that we can no longer wait, and their commitment to, all right, but how do we get it done? And so, just as Meredith, cheered on the work of Common Start, I have been so excited to see the diversity of folks and perspective at the table. And so, I'm looking forward to continuing this work, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do it with each of you here this evening. Amisha, let me pitch it to you.
Sure. I think that the thing that popped up really quickly for me as I considered this question was early in my career, right? That's where when we think about like the gender wage gap, that starts like day one, getting your first job. And I know that I have encountered some hesitancy, right, about what happens long term. What happens if, right? What happens if, well, if they're going to have kids, maybe we have to take account for that. Maybe, there's a hesitancy there. But I think if we can socially, we can all understand that, oh, well, if they have kids, there's going to be childcare for them. That's what's going to happen. This doesn't have to impact what happens in 5 years or so. So we don't have to be concerned today about what happens in 5 years. Not that that should be happening anyway, but I think it's a reality that especially younger people starting their careers are seeing. And this just removes a set of questions from the table. I know for my last job, my first like real career job, we didn't have a maternity or paternity policy. It just wasn't a thing. And that was a struggle for a lot of people who were starting families, who were trying to figure out, is my job going to be here when I come back? And when I come back, what does that look like? Just like Meredith was saying, the experience that her daughter is having right now, that's, I think, happening for a lot of people. I think it's happening for mothers, and we're starting to see it now happen, I think, for fathers as well, kind of seeing what's going on in other parts of the world and wanting to get to be more engaged at home. And what does that look like if we're both working, if one of us is working? So yeah, I think that's a really big part of women's advancement, of course, is making sure that there's not a preconceived notion that if this person has a child, they're going to be out for X, Y, or Z time and have to start taking afternoons off or something. And likewise, I am very excited to continue to work with my fellow panelists here tonight and everyone else that's on the call, and your networks, because of course, talking about what's important with the people in our lives is really how we affect change. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much. This has been a really important conversation, and I think I just want to echo what Jill said, as I think that we're in a moment in time where it's no longer acceptable to undervalue women, and I think that's a really an important and resonant thing for us all to remember as we close out this discussion. And the time is now for us to really take action for a caregiving economy that supports everyone in our society. I'll hand it off to Amy, who's going to wrap it up for us.
Well, thanks so much to the panelists. What a great discussion. So many of the themes, I've been able to be at many of the roundtables, and no matter what who's talking, the themes are the same. And we know that families don't live in funding streams, and we've created so many of these artificial barriers. We also know we can't call childcare essential for the economy and then continue to have 37% of early educators eligible for some sort of public assistance. And what you heard, all the examples tonight, that we have to have, that hearing the real day-to-day life challenges has helped inform our advocacy and policy decisions, and it really has to help drive how we match resources with needs. So I want to thank the panel. I'm going to put in chat now information about the Common Start Coalition. So there, as you've heard, there's many ways to get involved. There's a link for the coalition. There's a link for the legislation, so you can read up on the bill. There's a section about our stories, and we are always looking for folks' stories. We have key areas that we're still looking to get stories from. So I know if you get in touch with someone from Common Start, we can help match you with where we need stories. And then there's the Get Involved, where you can sign up to get your own updates from the Common Start Coalition, and also thinking about your organization endorsing the Common Start legislation and coalition. And finally, the Who Represents You link. So this link will tell you, you put it, if your name, excuse me, your street address, and it will tell you all of your elected officials. And we do know that redistricting will happen for the next, after the election. So right now, this is accurate for who your legislators are right now and who we need to contact to make sure that this bill, there's action on this bill by the end of this session. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us tonight. We have recorded this, and I know Common Start Coalition is using all of this information to continue to tell the story of why it's so important that we're making changes for children and families now.